In the spring of 1945, Hermann Göring was still alive. That alone made him dangerous. While cities, armies collapsed and loyalty dissolved, Göring remained convinced that history had not yet finished with him. Unlike others who chose bunkers or bullets, Göring chose something else. He chose survival. And in doing so, he set in motion one of the strangest final chapters of the Second World War. For years, Göring had been the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany. Decorated, wealthy, arrogant, and theatrical, he embodied the excess of a regime built on spectacle and authority. He had commanded the Luftwaffe. He had signed laws. He had lived in palaces. But by 1945, all of that had evaporated. What remained was ambition and a profound misunderstanding of reality. As Hitler retreated deeper into Berlin, Göring positioned himself far from the capital. Not out of fear, he would later claim, but out of necessity. He saw himself as a reserve, a stabilizing figure, the man who would step in when chaos peaked. In Göring's mind, this was not betrayal, it was succession. In late April 1945, Göring sent a message to Hitler that would change everything. The wording was careful, legal, almost respectful. He cited decrees, chain of command, constitutional logic. If Hitler was incapacitated, Göring argued leadership should pass to him. It was not a coup, it was procedure. At least that is how Göring saw it. Hitler did not. Inside the bunker, surrounded by loyalists who fed his paranoia, the message was received as treason. Göring was no longer seen as a successor. He was seen as a threat. Orders were issued. Göring was stripped of titles, placed under arrest, declared a traitor. The man who believed he would inherit the Reich had just been expelled from it. For Göring, this moment marked a psychological rupture. The illusion shattered. The Reich would not pass to him. It would die with Hitler. What mattered now was not power. It was leverage. As Germany collapsed, Göring began preparing for a future without the Reich. He gathered documents. He collected valuables. He positioned himself strategically near Allied lines. Not to fight, to negotiate. Unlike others, Göring believed he still had something to offer. Information. Order. A recognizable face for surrender. He imagined himself as a bridge between Germany and the Western Allies. A man who could prevent total chaos by offering controlled collapse. This belief was not shared. In May 1945, Göring surrendered to American forces, not in disguise, not in flight, but openly. He arrived with luggage, with medical staff, with a sense of performance intact. Even in defeat, Göring staged himself. The Americans were stunned. Here was one of the most recognizable faces of the Nazi regime, alive, talkative, almost relaxed. He requested privileges. He demanded respect. He acted not like a fugitive, but like a statesman awaiting negotiations. What Göring did not understand was that the world had already moved past him. There would be no deals, no immunity, no transition of power. There would be judgment. This was only the beginning. Because survival did not mean safety, and surrender did not mean escape, this is not yet the story of Göring's trial. It is the story of how a man who believed himself indispensable slowly realized he was expendable. Hermann Göring did not arrive into captivity as a defeated man. He arrived as a man who still believed in relevance. When American forces took him into custody in early May 1945, Göring made no attempt to flee or disguise himself. He did not run through forests or hide among civilians. Instead, he presented himself openly, wearing a carefully chosen uniform, surrounded by luggage, personal effects, medical supplies, and aids. Even surrender was theatrical. For Göring, performance had always been power. The Americans were immediately struck by the contrast. This was not the broken image they expected. Göring appeared overweight, confident, and talkative. He joked. He complained about accommodations. He asked questions as if he were attending a conference rather than surrendering at the end of a catastrophic war. He behaved less like a criminal and more like a politician temporarily inconvenienced. This behavior unsettled his captors, not because it was threatening, but because it revealed how deeply Göring misunderstood the moment. From the beginning, Göring attempted to control the narrative. He emphasized his opposition to what he called Hitler's excesses. He framed himself as a stabilizing force. He spoke about the dangers of chaos if Germany collapsed without structure. In his telling, he was not the problem. He was the solution that had been ignored. American officers listened carefully, not because they believed him, but because they wanted to understand how someone so deeply implicated could still speak with such certainty. Göring spoke freely. He volunteered information. He corrected small factual errors. But he never offered guilt. Responsibility in his mind was collective, abstract, diffused, never personal. As Göring was moved between holding locations, a subtle shift began. The environment was controlled. The guards were polite but firm. Privileges were reduced. Requests were denied. There were no negotiations. And slowly, Göring realized something unsettling. No one was impressed. The illusion cracked not confrontation, but through indifference. The Americans did not flatter him. They did not debate him ideologically. They did not treat him as a statesman. They treated him as an object of study, a future defendant. This was new for Göring. For years, rooms had adjusted themselves around his presence. Servants appeared, subordinates agreed. Rivalries bent. Now doors remained closed. Schedules were imposed. Silence became common. He could speak for hours. It changed nothing. One of the most striking aspects of Göring's early captivity was his sense of hierarchy. He still ranked people instinctively. He addressed officers as if status still mattered. He corrected guards about titles that no longer existed. This was not arrogance alone. It was habit. The inability to function without structure that placed him at the top. Over time, Göring's health became a focal point. He complained of pain, of fatigue, of dependency. Medical examinations revealed his long-term addiction to morphine and other substances. The Americans began carefully controlling his access to medication. For Göring, this was devastating. The substances had dulled anxiety, smoothed reality, maintained confidence. Without them, reality sharpened. As withdrawal progressed, Göring's mood shifted dramatically. Confidence gave way to irritation, irritation to defensiveness, defensiveness to anxiety. Still, he did not collapse. Instead, he adapted. He turned inward. Göring began rehearsing arguments. He spoke to imaginary audiences. He explained decisions aloud. He justified actions in advance. This was preparation. He did not yet know the scale of what was coming, but instinctively he understood judgment lay ahead. By the time Göring was transferred to a more permanent detention facility, his understanding had evolved. He was no longer talking about leadership. He was talking about explanation. This marked a fundamental change. Power had been replaced by narrative defense. He asked about other prisoners. Who had surrendered? Who had died? Who had escaped? Names mattered. Hierarchy still mattered. Even in captivity, Göring measured himself relative to others. When he learned that many Nazi leaders were dead, he reacted with a mix of shock and contempt. Some he pitied, some he dismissed, some he secretly envied. Death, he realized, was not the worst outcome. Irrelevance was. As weeks passed, Göring was informed gradually, deliberately, of the scale of what the Allies intended. There would be trials, public trials, international trials. This information was not dramatized. It was presented as fact. The reaction this time was different. Göring did not protest. He did not rage. He did not laugh. He grew quiet, and that silence marked the true beginning of his ordeal. For the first time, Göring began to grasp the truth he had avoided. He would not be a negotiator. He would not be a bridge. He would not be remembered as a stabilizer. He would be remembered as a defendant. Survival had not given him leverage. It had merely postponed reckoning. This was the moment Göring stopped imagining a future shaped by his hand and began imagining a past reshaped by his words. When Hermann Göring arrived at Nuremberg in the late summer of 1945, he understood immediately that this place was different. This was not a prison built to hold bodies. It was a stage built to judge narratives. And Göring, more than any other defendant, recognized the danger and the opportunity in that fact. The Palace of Justice did not intimidate him at first. High ceilings, long corridors, cold stone walls. To Göring, these resembled places of power he had once occupied. He entered with posture intact, shoulders back, voice confident, eyes alert. He was not yet ready to appear defeated. As the defendants were housed together, a strange social system began to form. Hierarchies re-emerged almost instinctively. Some men withdrew into silence. Some collapsed emotionally. Some clung to legal technicalities. Göring did something else. He asserted dominance. From the beginning, Göring positioned himself as the informal leader among the Nazi defendants. He spoke the most. He interrupted. He explained events to others as if lecturing subordinates. Many listened, not because they respected him, but because he filled the vacuum left by the collapse of authority. Even here, Göring needed to lead. He mocked those who appeared weak. He ridiculed those who denied obvious facts. He criticized anyone who showed remorse. In Göring's worldview, remorse was vulnerability, and vulnerability was fatal. The guards and psychologists observed this carefully. They noticed how Göring commanded attention, how he energized conversations, how his presence altered group dynamics. Some feared he was influencing others. Others realized something deeper. He was rehearsing. Göring believed the trial would not be decided solely by evidence. It would be decided by confidence. He assumed that if he appeared articulate, witty, and composed, he could reshape perception. This assumption defined his entire strategy. As preparations intensified, Göring spent hours developing arguments. He reviewed documents. He reconstructed timelines. He framed decisions as necessities. He spoke of context, of historical conditions, of collective responsibility, always collective, never personal. When interrogators pressed him about specific actions, air raids, slave labor, property seizures, Göring deflected with ease. He answered indirectly. He reframed intentions. He shifted emphasis. He was not lying outright. He was sculpting meaning. In private, Göring acknowledged that the trial was dangerous. But he also believed something extraordinary, that he could win. Not acquittal, but significance. Göring knew that death was possible. What he feared was being dismissed as small, as merely another criminal. He wanted to be remembered as central, as a thinker, as a strategist, as a man who mattered. As the trial began, Göring delivered exactly what he had prepared for. He spoke confidently, challenged prosecutors, corrected translations, engaged the judges directly. Observers noted the contrast. While others appeared nervous or evasive, Göring seemed almost relaxed, at times even triumphant. The press noticed. Headlines focused on him. Sketches captured his expressions. Commentators described his presence as commanding. For a brief moment, Göring appeared to be controlling the room. But control is fragile in rooms built for truth. The evidence did not arrive all at once. It accumulated. Film footage, documents, testimonies, numbers. Each piece eroded the space Göring had carved for himself. Slowly, he began to realize a shift. The judges were listening, but they were not persuaded. What Göring had underestimated was scale, not the scale of atrocities that he understood intellectually, but the scale of documentation. The trial was not asking him to explain his role. It was demonstrating it, relentlessly. As weeks passed, Göring's demeanor changed subtly, still articulate, still sharp, but less amused, less dismissive. The confidence remained, but the ease disappeared. Even so, Göring did not retreat. He doubled down. He became more aggressive, more sarcastic. more defiant. If persuasion failed, confrontation might still preserve stature. Inside his cell at night, Göring spoke to himself. Witnesses later recalled hearing him rehearse answers aloud, reframe arguments, repeat explanations, sharpen wording. This was not fear, it was obsession. Göring was not trying to save his life alone, he was trying to write his own verdict. But the trial was moving beyond him, and soon it would reach a point where no performance could alter the outcome. At first, Hermann Göring believed he was winning, not legally, not morally, but psychologically. During the early sessions of the Nuremberg Trials, he sensed attention shifting toward him. Journalists quoted his exchanges. Courtroom artists captured his confident posture and expressive face. Observers spoke of his intelligence, his composure, his command of language. To Göring, this meant validation. He had always believed the battle was one of perception. And perception, he thought, was still within his reach. What he failed to understand was that the trial was not structured like the political arenas he knew. There was no crowd to sway, no faction to rally, no compromise to negotiate. This was not propaganda, it was accumulation. The prosecution did not attempt to dismantle Göring in one dramatic confrontation. Instead, it proceeded methodically, piece by piece, session by session, building a structure so dense that no single defense could destabilize it. Document after document was introduced, orders signed, meetings recorded, minutes preserved, logistics traced. Each item carried Göring's name, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, always unmistakably. At first, Göring addressed each piece confidently. He contextualized, he reframed, he diminished significance, he emphasized collective decision-making. But repetition began to work against him. The same defense applied to too many facts began to sound hollow. The judges listened patiently. They did not interrupt, they did not challenge theatrically. They allowed Göring to speak, and then they presented another document, then another, then another. As the weeks progressed, Göring noticed something unsettling. The room was no longer reacting to him. Faces remained neutral. Pens continued moving. The rhythm did not change when he spoke. His words were being recorded, not absorbed. This marked a subtle but profound shift. Göring was no longer controlling the pace. The evidence was. One of the most damaging moments came when the prosecution connected Göring's authority to systems he had consistently distanced himself from. Forced labor, expropriation of Jewish property, the economic machinery that fed the war. Göring attempted to deflect by emphasizing administrative complexity, but the documentation contradicted him. His signature appeared again, and again, and again. For the first time, Göring's tone changed. He grew sharper, more defensive, less playful. His answers lengthened. His explanations became convoluted. Confidence remained, but it now carried strain. The press began to notice. Early admiration cooled. Articles shifted in tone. Sketches portrayed him less as commanding and more as cornered. Göring read these pieces obsessively. He never admitted it aloud, but he felt the shift. Inside his cell, his behavior changed. He slept less, he paced more, he revisited transcripts repeatedly. The performance was being dissected, and it was not holding. What truly unsettled Göring was not the accusation of crimes. It was the erosion of his uniqueness. He was being reduced from architect to component, from mastermind to functionary, from the man who'd explain everything to one of many responsible. For Göring, this was unbearable. He attempted to regain initiative by becoming more confrontational. He challenged the legitimacy of the court. He mocked witnesses. He sharpened his rhetoric. At times, this electrified the room briefly. But it did not change direction. The prosecution did not argue with him. It presented more evidence. This strategy frustrated Göring deeply. His instincts were built for debate, not documentation. As the trial entered its later phases, Göring's health declined again. Weight fluctuations, irritability, Withdrawal symptoms resurfaced. He was still articulate, still alert, but the emotional armor was thinning. Privately, Göring began asking questions. What sentences were possible? What precedents existed? How executions were carried out? These were not asked directly. They emerged casually, indirectly, as if information itself could soften inevitability. By now, Göring understood something essential. The trial would not be decided by his intelligence. It would be decided by the collective weight of his actions. And no amount of rhetoric could lift that weight. Still, he did not express regret. Not publicly, not privately. To the end, Göring distinguished between failure and guilt. He accepted the first. He rejected the second. But even this distinction was beginning to collapse, because the court was not evaluating his feelings. It was judging his role, and that role was fully illuminated. The man who arrived at Nuremberg believing he could shape history's judgment was learning a different truth, that sometimes history does not argue, it documents. By the time the Nuremberg trials reached their final phase, Hermann Göring no longer believed he would escape judgment, but he still believed he could survive it. This distinction mattered deeply to him. He had lost the battle of narrative, he had lost the illusion of control, but physical survival still seemed possible. And so, his thinking shifted once again. As closing arguments began, Göring listened carefully, not with outrage, not with denial, but with calculation. He observed how prosecutors framed responsibility, how judges reacted to certain phrasing, which arguments carried emotional weight and which remained strictly legal. He measured the room constantly. The prosecution's closing statement did not single Göring out with theatrical condemnation. It did something far more damaging. It placed him within a structure, a system, a network, a hierarchy. He was not presented as a unique villain. He was presented as indispensable. This framing unsettled Göring deeply. He had always seen himself as exceptional. Now exceptionality had become liability. The more central his role appeared, the heavier the judgment. When Göring was given the opportunity to speak one final time, he did not collapse into apology. He spoke calmly, deliberately. He rejected the moral authority of the court. He defended the idea of state survival. He framed his actions as historically conditioned. There was no remorse, only justification. Some observers found his words chilling. Others found them empty. The judges remained silent. They had heard everything they needed. As deliberations began, Göring was escorted back to his cell. This was the longest wait of his life. Days passed slowly. Meals arrived without comment. Routine continued as if nothing were happening. But everything was happening. Inside his cell, Göring's thoughts circled obsessively. What sentence was possible? What precedent might apply? Which defendants might receive leniency? He compared, constantly. Comparison had always been his anchor. When verdict day arrived, the atmosphere inside the courtroom was heavy but controlled. No chaos, no shouting, no spectacle, just judgment. One by one, verdicts were read. Guilty, guilty, guilty. When Göring's name was called, the room held its breath. He stood upright, face composed, hands steady. He listened. Death by hanging. The words were spoken plainly. No emphasis. Pause. For a moment, Göring did not react. Then, almost imperceptibly, his jaw tightened. This was not the ending he had imagined. Göring had prepared himself mentally for imprisonment, for decades of confinement, for isolation, for survival in disgrace. But execution, public execution, represented something else entirely. It meant loss of control over the ending, and for Göring, that was unbearable. In the days following the verdict, Göring's demeanor shifted. He spoke less, joked less, argued less. Those who observed him noticed something new. Focus, not panic, resolution. Göring requested meetings, asked questions, clarified dates, not about appeals, about logistics. He inquired about timing, about methods, about procedures. Indirectly, casually, As if discussing an upcoming trip, the guards noted this behavior carefully. So did the psychologists. They suspected Göring was planning something. They were right. Göring had watched others die. He had watched comrades choose suicide over humiliation. He had judged them harshly at the time. Now, he reconsidered. The execution, as planned, would strip Göring of everything he valued: dignity, control, image, to be displayed, restrained, executed publicly. This was not justice in Göring's mind. And Göring refused to be on that stage. Quietly, methodically, he began crafting an alternative ending. Not escape, not reversal, but authorship. How he did this? When exactly the opportunity appeared? Who failed to notice? These questions would later haunt those responsible. But Göring had always thrived in systems that underestimated performance. The man who once believed he could outargue history had reached a simpler conclusion. If judgment was inevitable, then the ending must still be his. This was not an act of fear, it was an act of control. The final move had begun. The night of October 15, 1946, settled quietly over Nuremberg. There were no sirens, no crowds, no ceremony. Inside the prison, routines continued with mechanical precision. Guards changed shifts. Lights dimmed at scheduled hours. Paperwork moved through hands that had performed these actions hundreds of times before. Tomorrow, the executions would take place. Hermann Göring knew this, and he had already decided he would not be there to see them. For days after the verdict, Göring had presented an appearance of calm. He followed instructions. He spoke politely. He avoided confrontation. This behavior reassured those watching him. It suggested resignation. It was not resignation. It was concealment. Göring understood systems. He had built them, manipulated them, hidden inside them. Prisons were systems too, and systems always contain gaps. In the days leading up to the execution, Göring requested small privileges: papers, writing materials, conversations, nothing unusual, nothing excessive. But every interaction was measured, observed, catalogued mentally. The cyanide capsule had not appeared suddenly. There were multiple theories afterward, multiple failures identified, multiple officials blamed. Some believed Göring had hidden it for years. Others believed it was smuggled in shortly before the execution. What matters is not how. What matters is why it worked. On the evening of October 15, Göring was visited by a guard. Nothing unusual was reported. Göring appeared relaxed, even reflective. He spoke briefly, he smiled, he thanked the guard. This moment would later haunt that man. Shortly after 10:30 p.m., a sound echoed down the corridor. Not a shout, not a struggle, a dull thud. When guards rushed to Göring's cell, they found him collapsed on the floor, foam at the mouth, breathing shallow, body convulsing. Medical staff were summoned immediately, but they already knew this was cyanide. Within minutes, Hermann Göring was dead. The highest-ranking Nazi leader tried at Nuremberg had escaped the gallows, not through innocence, not through mercy, but through self-authorship. The reaction was immediate and severe. Officials were furious. Guards were interrogated. Procedures were reviewed. How could this have happened? Who was responsible? What had been overlooked? But answers came slowly, and none restored what had been lost. For the Allies, Göring's suicide was more than an embarrassment. It was a symbolic theft. Justice had been planned, witnessed, recorded, but the final act had been denied. Göring left behind a short note. Not an apology, not a confession, a justification. He framed his act not as escape, but as refusal. Refusal to submit, refusal to be displayed, refusal to be humiliated. The executions went on as scheduled the next morning. One by one, the condemned were hanged. The world watched. History closed a chapter. But Göring's absence was felt. The reaction from the press was immediate. Shock, anger, speculation. Some saw Göring's suicide as cowardice. Others saw it as final arrogance. Some disturbingly admired the defiance. That ambiguity disturbed historians most of all. because Göring had once again succeeded in reframing himself, not as an executed criminal, but as a man who chose his fate. This was dangerous. It risked softening judgment, turning refusal into agency, control into myth. Historians would later argue fiercely over this moment. Did Göring cheat justice? Or did justice still stand? The answer is uncomfortable. Both are true. Göring avoided the rope, but he did not avoid the record. The trial transcripts remain. The evidence stands. The verdict remains unchanged. History did not need his body. It already had his role. What Göring achieved with his suicide was not redemption. It was delay. A final attempt to distract from responsibility and focus attention on method instead of meaning. In the end, Hermann Göring did not defeat justice. He merely denied its spectacle. And spectacle was never the point. The Third Reich promised glory, promised dominance, promised eternity. It ended with men hiding poison and choosing silence. Göring believed power meant control over endings. In truth, power had already left him. What remained was fear of indignity. The war ended. The trials concluded. The world moved forward. But Göring's story remains, not as legend, not as tragedy, but as instruction. That intellect without accountability becomes evasion. That performance without ethics becomes emptiness. And that refusal to face judgment does not erase it. Hermann Göring chose his ending. History chose his meaning. And those two choices were never the same.